Awesome, Kaylee. Thanks so much. That's right. We have our very own Eric Kulisch here with us. And Eric, we're talking about Amerijet and Korean Air and this merger that hangs in the balance. Thanks for joining us this morning. And what's the latest?
Hey, Anthony. Thanks for having me on. It's an interesting story, kind of how companies using the regulatory process to kind of gain a competitive edge. And, I was digging through some regulatory filings and discovered that Amerijet, which is a mid-market cargo airline based out of Miami, most people don't even know who they are, but they're kind of taking on Korean Air, which is one of the big international carriers, but also has a large freighter fleet, is one of the largest cargo carriers in the world by volume. And so turns out that Korean Air has started a small business jet startup a couple years ago, and they recently applied to the Department of Transportation to get a foreign air carrier permit to fly maybe a dozen times to the U.S. with these business jets and corporate business jets. And Amerijet found out about it and said, wait a minute, told the DOT, wait a minute, you need to block this until we get our request for flying access into South Korea approved. They complained that the South Korean government is stalling their application to get scheduled cargo service there. It's interesting because they already serve South Korea or fly there on behalf of Maersk Air Cargo, so they're a contract carrier. And they go, multiple times a month to Seoul, but it turns out that is kind of ad hoc or temporary authority. They have to reapply every month, and it costs money, and there's a lot of uncertainty if and when they're going to get that authority, and they want kind of a permanent scheduled authority. And they're saying, hey, Korean Air, and so it turns out they said, we've discovered that Korean Air is behind this or complained to the Korean authorities to block us. We don't know why they're complaining about our application, but if they're trying to block us there, you need to block them here.
Eric, I think this is kind of a funny story because they don't really have like a super big relationship to each other, right? It's not like the Korean Air business jets, as you mentioned, 12 of them are going to take a super huge market share out of what Amerijet does in the United States. And really that only case is the fact that there is this so-called blockage going on in South Korea. What does the Department of Transportation actually have to do? And is there now also a poke into the Department of Justice too that involves in this case?
Yeah, so the business jets wouldn't impact Amerijet at all. I doubt they're carrying any cargo. They're carrying corporate executives and so forth. So, but it's a way, there's an ownership stake with Korean Air, and so it's a way to kind of get back at them or fire a shot across the bow or get U.S. authorities to, pressure the Koreans to maybe expedite their application. So from that standpoint, we're not 100%, we're not really clear what Korean Air's objection is, although we can assume maybe it has something to do with, Korean Air's freighter fleet and providing service to North America. More broadly, it's just, I think the DOT, we'll have to see what they do and what kind of pressure they put on the South Koreans, or if they'll stall on this application for the time being. I forgot the last part of your question.
I mentioned about the DOJ
Justice
involvement
Department.
as well, yeah.
Yeah, Justice Department. Yeah, that's a great thing. So that was interesting too. They mentioned in there, at the same time, kind of behind the scenes, Korean Air has this big merger plan going on with another Korean carrier called Asiana, which has had this is mired in debt and has had some financial problems, especially since I think it pre-existed the pandemic. But it's a large carrier, and they also have a freighter fleet of several 747 freighters and some other aircraft. And so the Korean government asked Korean Air a couple of years ago to take over or get a majority stake in Asiana, and that process is going through. Several countries have approved, but the European Union and the U.S. have raised a lot of red flags. They worry about kind of whether it's going to be anti-competitive on passenger markets, but notably also on cargo markets. And so Amerijet was made a reference to that and said, the Justice Department, this seems like anti-competitive tactics on Korean Air's part. Maybe you should look at what they're doing to us and as part of your review of the Asiana merger. So we'll have to see how that goes. But that Asiana merger has got some new developments going on there too, separate from this.
And Eric, with Asiana not doing so well, and as you mentioned, mired in so much debt, if they were to go under, would it essentially almost reach the same conclusion for Korean Air as really being able to really have as much market share as they would have either way in this instance?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if Asiana goes under, which I'm not exactly sure if that's would happen with I think they might have some state support, but maybe Korean Air or someone else can get some of those assets on more cheaply. But the Korean government obviously wants those companies to combine to not have that dislocation. So either way, I think Korean Air would get some of the traffic and routes and the aircraft, but the preferred method is to have a merger and do it cleanly.
So, Eric, the other thing in this is that Amerijet has had kind of a difficult year, right? As you mentioned, they're kind of that mid-tier cargo airline. Obviously, they've definitely been victim to the slowdown in air freight. Are they kind of grasping at straws to kind of get their business going and continue to see progress from it while minimizing costs?
Yeah, well, I think having, I don't know how, in the grand scheme of things, I'm not sure how this Korean Air or Korea application will harm them. I mean, if they can get each month authority to fly, then their business with Maersk Air Cargo continues. But they say it adds cost because every time they have to file and get, have their lawyers or hire outside lawyers to file for the flying permit, and then they also have this uncertainty until the last minute of whether the flights can go through. So there's extra cost there. But more broadly, they have had a significant revenue downturn this year, with the air cargo downturn, and they've also had rising costs. They have a new pilot labor agreement that raises over the next few years, about 40% increase in wages for the pilots and other costs. So they've laid off a couple dozen people. They've closed a small forwarding branch. They've cut back on a couple flights, and so they're looking for all kinds of ways to stop the bleeding. So they're private. We don't know exactly how they're doing, but obviously, it's a little difficult for them right now.
Certainly sounds like a lot of moving parts here. Eric, thanks so much for joining us and shedding some light on it.
Okay, anytime, Anthony. Thanks a lot.
All right, now we're going to go on over to Tony Mulvey. He's got Joe Antichek here for today's edition of the Research Corner.